The stars stretched across the black void of space like a never-ending sea of light. In the midst of this vast expanse, a single ship raced through the darkness. The Elysium, a human vessel, its sleek metallic surface gleaming under the distant suns. Inside, the crew was on high alert, their eyes locked on their monitors, every sound amplified in the silence of space. Captain Mason stood at the helm, staring out at the endless space ahead. The Elysium had been on a mission for months, exploring distant worlds and learning what they could about the alien civilizations that shared their galaxy. But there was something different about this mission. The crew had heard the rumors, the whispers of war brewing in the stars. The galaxy believed that humans were a young species, afraid of conflict, too small and fragile to survive a real war. Mason knew the truth. Humanity had always been underestimated. It was part of who they were. Every challenge they faced, every enemy they fought, they had proved the galaxy wrong. And now, as the crew of the Elysium prepared for what could be their most dangerous mission yet, Mason felt that same fire burning in his chest. He wasn't afraid. Humans were not afraid. But what would they face next? "Captain," said Marcus, his voice breaking the silence, "we're picking up strange signals from a nearby sector. They're not human." Mason turned sharply. Marcus was the ship's communications officer, always on top of anything that might threaten them. "What kind of signals?" "Unidentified," Marcus replied, his fingers flying over the console. "I can't decipher the language, but the patterns, they don't look random. Someone's out there." Mason narrowed his eyes. They had been traveling in uncharted space, away from any known human settlements. If there was another ship out here, it could be an enemy, alien forces who had never encountered humanity before. But if these signals weren't human, there was something even worse to consider, an unknown, hostile species. He turned to Sarah, the ship's navigator. "Plot a course to the source. Let's see what we're dealing with." A tense silence filled the bridge as Sarah typed in the new coordinates. The hum of the Elysium's engines was the only sound. Each crew member knew how high the stakes were. If this was a threat, they were alone out here, with no help for light years. The ship changed course, moving closer to the unknown signal. The crew could feel the tension in the air. Their mission had just shifted from exploration to survival. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they neared the source. Suddenly, the sensors began to beep wildly, and the crew froze. A massive object appeared on the radar. It was close, way too close, and it wasn't a ship the Elysium recognized. The object was enormous, unlike anything the crew had ever seen. Its shape was unlike anything human-made, and its energy readings were off the charts. "It's massive," Marcus exclaimed, his voice filled with awe and fear. I don't know how to classify it. It's not just a ship, it's something else." Mason's heart raced as he leaned over Marcus's shoulder to see the readings. "Can we communicate with it?" Sarah looked up from the navigation console. "I've tried. There's no response. It's like they're not even aware of us." The Elysium crept closer, its engines purring softly. The crew was silent, the weight of what they were facing pressing down on them. They had expected the unknown to be hostile, but this was something different. Suddenly, the ship's hull shuddered. It wasn't an attack, but something far more disorienting. The ship's lights flickered, and the instruments went haywire. Then, a deep, rumbling noise echoed through the ship, as if the universe itself was warning them. "What was that?" Sarah's voice was tight with fear. "Shut everything down," Mason ordered. "All systems, offline. We don't know what we're dealing with." The crew scrambled to follow his orders. The Elysium's systems went dark, leaving them in eerie silence. The noise outside seemed to intensify, filling the space around them. For a moment, they sat there, waiting for the next move. What was out there? Was it a trap? Were they being tested? Or was this the first contact with an alien species? Mason's mind raced. He had seen the reports, heard the whispers, But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Why had they been sent here? Why were humans always seen as weak? He had always known that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its weapons, but in its willingness to fight back when others believed they were too weak to stand. But was that enough to face whatever was out there? The rumbling ceased as suddenly as it had begun. The ship was quiet once again, and the Elysium returned to full power. But the crew knew that something had changed. Whatever they had just encountered, whatever this ship was, had left its mark on them. "Stay alert," Mason ordered. "I have a feeling we're not alone out here. This is just the beginning." The crew nodded, their fear now replaced with determination. They knew what was at stake. The galaxy had believed that humanity was too small to matter, too afraid to fight. But they were wrong. They would show them. The Elysium surged forward once again, its engines a steady pulse in the vast silence of space. The crew didn't know what awaited them, but one thing was certain: they were ready for whatever came next. The Elysium drifted through space, its engines humming softly as it made its way toward the mysterious alien ship. The crew, still on edge from the unsettling rumblings, remained alert, their eyes fixed on their consoles, waiting for any sign of danger. The unknown ship remained silent, its shape barely visible against the black void of space, but its presence was undeniable. Captain Mason stood at the helm, his hand steady on the controls. His face was grim, but there was a fire in his eyes. Humans were never the kind to back down, especially when faced with the unknown. "Any response from the alien ship?" Mason asked, his voice calm but filled with urgency. "No, Captain," Marcus replied, eyes glued to the communication screens. "No signs of communication, no movement. It's as if they're waiting for us to make the first move." Mason frowned. This wasn't what he had expected. If the alien ship had been so advanced, why hadn't it made contact? Why were they just sitting there, like shadows in the dark? "Stay on course," Mason ordered. "Let's get close enough to see what we're dealing with." The crew worked quickly, adjusting the ship's trajectory as the massive unknown vessel loomed ever closer. As they approached, the Elysium's sensors picked up strange readings, energy patterns they couldn't quite explain. The ship seemed to be made of a material unlike anything human technology had encountered. It glowed faintly in the dark, with an eerie, otherworldly light that pulsed rhythmically. "Captain, something's wrong," Sarah, the navigator, said suddenly, her voice filled with concern. "Our systems are getting interference. It's like the ship's presence is, affecting everything around us." Mason glanced at the readings, then back at the crew. He could see the same uncertainty in their eyes, the same fear creeping in. They had faced challenges before, but this was something entirely new. They were approaching the unknown, and they had no idea what it would mean for humanity. "All systems on high alert," Mason ordered. "Prepare for anything." As the Elysium closed the distance, a sudden blinding flash of light erupted from the alien ship. The crew braced themselves, shielding their eyes as the light filled the bridge. The light didn't last long, but in that moment, the temperature in the room seemed to drop, and an intense pressure weighed down on everyone. "What was that?" Marcus gasped, rubbing his eyes as the afterglow of the light faded. "It came from the alien ship," Sarah confirmed, her fingers flying across the console as she tried to regain control of the ship's systems. "I don't know how, but it's like they were sending a message." "Could it be a warning?" Mason asked, his mind racing. Was this a peaceful greeting or a threat? The unknowns were stacking up, and it felt like they were only beginning to scratch the surface. "We're picking up something else," Marcus said, his voice tight. "A signal. But it's not a regular transmission. It's almost like they're trying to communicate with us." Mason nodded. "Send a response. Let them know we're here." Marcus hesitated for a moment before he typed in the command, attempting to establish contact now. A tense silence filled the bridge. The crew waited, hoping for some kind of answer. Seconds felt like minutes. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the signal vanished. The alien ship was silent again, as if it had never made its presence known. Mason's heart pounded in his chest. What did this mean? Were they being observed, or were they being tested? He couldn't shake the feeling that something far larger was at play. "Captain," Sarah spoke up, her voice filled with tension. "We're getting a strange reading from the ship's surface. Something is moving." Mason frowned. "What kind of movement?" "It's hard to explain," Sarah said, eyes wide. "It's like the ship is transforming, changing shape. It's almost as if it's reacting to us being here." "Ready the weapons," Mason ordered, his voice sharp. "We don't know what we're dealing with, but we're not going to stand by and let them catch us off guard." "Understood," came the reply, and the crew began preparing for the worst. The Elysium's weapons systems hummed to life, but the crew couldn't shake the feeling that they were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. A long moment passed in tense silence, but just as the crew braced themselves for an attack, something unexpected happened. The alien ship suddenly spoke, not through a voice, but through a flash of light that shimmered across the Elysium's hull. The light was like a message, bright, clear, and unlike anything human technology could replicate. "It's like they're trying to communicate with us directly," Marcus said, his voice in awe. Mason studied the shimmering patterns on the screen. It was like a language, but one that was too complex to decipher in such a short time. "I think they're waiting for us to understand," Mason murmured, his eyes narrowing. "This could be our first real contact. We need to figure out what they want." But before he could give further orders, the ship's lights flickered again, and the Elysium was hit with a wave of energy. The force threw the crew off their feet, and alarms blared as the ship's systems failed once more. "Captain, we're losing power," Sarah shouted. "Something's draining our energy." Mason gripped the console, his mind racing. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a test. It was a challenge. The crew of the Elysium had to prove that humanity wasn't afraid. They had to show the galaxy that they could face the unknown, no matter how dangerous. "Get the power back online, now," Mason ordered, "and prepare for anything. We're not going to let them think we're weak." As the crew scrambled to regain control, Mason's mind raced. This was just the beginning, and they would have to be ready for whatever came next. The Elysium shuddered as another surge of energy washed over the ship. The crew scrambled, their movements frantic yet precise as they worked to restore power. Lights flickered, consoles buzzed with warnings, and the ship groaned as if struggling against an unseen force. Come on," Sarah muttered under her breath, her fingers flying over the navigation controls. "We're losing time." Marcus was hunched over the communication console, his face bathed in the eerie glow of the alien signals. "I'm trying to send a response, but the interference, it's like nothing I've ever seen before. It's almost like they're jamming us." Captain Mason stood at the front of the bridge, his eyes fixed on the strange patterns that danced across the screens. The ship's systems were flickering and unstable, but it was the eerie silence that unsettled him most. The alien ship had been sending strange signals, but nothing they could understand. Why were they so persistent? Why didn't they communicate clearly? Then, as if responding to their confusion, the alien ship pulsed with light again, brighter this time, stronger. It was so intense that the crew had to shield their eyes. The pulse was not just a flash of light, but a sequence, a pattern repeating itself, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. "That's it," Marcus said, his voice breaking through the chaos. "That's not just light. That's a signal. They're trying to tell us something." Mason stared at the screen. The pattern, while mesmerizing, was still indecipherable. But there was something undeniably intentional about it. "Is it a language?" he asked, his voice low. "I think so," Marcus replied, focusing on the console. "It's like they're using light to encode information, almost like a form of visual language. I think I can translate part of it." The crew held their breath as Marcus worked quickly, inputting complex codes into the system in an attempt to decode the signal. Mason stood still, watching the patterns flash before him. His mind raced, every fiber of his being focused on the hope that they could somehow make contact, find out what these beings wanted, and why they had made such an impact on their ship. After what felt like an eternity, Marcus' voice broke the silence. "I've got something. It's a basic translation, but it's something." Mason leaned forward. "What does it say?" Marcus paused for a moment, his fingers hovering above the keyboard as the decoded message flickered on the screen. "We know you are not afraid. We know you are stronger than they believe. Prove it to us." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Mason's eyes narrowed. There was something chilling about the message. The alien ship wasn't just sending a warning or a request for contact. It was testing them. Humanity was being called to prove something, to show their strength. But what exactly did they mean? "Do we respond?" Sarah asked, her voice tense. Mason thought for a moment. "We don't have a choice. We've been thrust into this. We need to show them what humanity is capable of." He turned to Marcus. "Send a signal. Let them know we understand their message and we're not backing down." Marcus hesitated. "Captain, if we respond, there's no turning back. We don't know what kind of consequences this could have." "I'm aware of that," Mason said, his tone unwavering. "But we can't back down now. Not after everything we've been through. Humanity's strength is in our resilience. We've faced impossible odds before, and we will again." Marcus nodded, understanding the gravity of the decision. He quickly keyed in the message, sending their reply into the vast emptiness of space, to the waiting alien ship. "We're sending it now, Captain," he said, his voice heavy with anticipation. The crew held their breath as the seconds ticked by. The ship's systems flickered once more, the hum of the engines reverberating in the tense silence. Then, suddenly, the ship was rocked by a violent force. The entire bridge lurched as alarms blared, and the crew was thrown from their seats. "What the hell was that?" Sarah shouted, gripping the console to steady herself. "Damage report," Mason barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We've lost power to the lower decks," Sarah responded quickly. "But the hull integrity is holding. Get it back online now," Mason ordered. The crew scrambled to restore systems, their movements hurried and frantic. Just as they regained control of the ship, the alien ship responded. This time, not with light, but with something far more terrifying. A deep, resonating hum filled the Elysium, vibrating through the very walls of the ship, a sound unlike anything they had ever heard. It wasn't a natural frequency. It was as though the ship itself was speaking to them through the resonance. Then a voice that was not human, echoed across the comms. "You have proven yourselves, but this is just the beginning. The test is not over. Prepare yourselves." The message was simple, yet haunting. The crew stood frozen, their eyes wide with shock. The alien ship had communicated with them, not just through light, but with sound. And it had warned them. The test had just begun. "Captain," Marcus said, his voice shaky, "what do we do now?" Mason looked at his crew, his expression hardening. "We face whatever comes next. We prove humanity's strength. We show them that we will never back down." The hum from the alien ship continued, like an invisible hand pressing down on them, reminding them of the challenge they had just accepted. The test had begun. And this time, humanity was not the prey. They were the hunters. The Elysium hovered in space, its crew tense and ready, as the alien ship continued to emit its deep, resonating hum. The words that had echoed over the comms still rang in Mason's ears. "The test is not over. Prepare yourselves." Humanity was being tested, but by whom? And why? Mason had no answers, only a growing sense of unease. The alien ship, so advanced and mysterious, was playing a game they didn't fully understand. But one thing was clear: the stakes were higher than ever. "Captain, The ship is still emitting that strange frequency, Sarah said, her voice tight with strain. It's affecting our sensors again. We can barely get any readings. Mason glanced at the flickering screens. The alien presence was suffocating, like a constant pressure pressing down on them from all sides. The unknown ship loomed nearby, its energy pulsing like a heartbeat, as if waiting for them to make their move. We've got no choice, Mason said, his jaw set. We respond with force. They want to test us. We'll show them what humanity is made of. But Marcus hesitated. Captain, we don't even know what their intentions are. They've done nothing to harm us yet. What if they're just trying to understand us? Mason shot him a sharp look. They've already shown us their power. They've already made it clear that they want to see what we're capable of. We can't waste time wondering. We need to act. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. There was no turning back now. They were committed to this path, whether they understood it fully or not. Sarah, prepare our weapons systems, Mason ordered. We don't fire unless they make a move first, but we need to be ready. Sarah nodded, her fingers already working over the controls. Understood, Captain. Mason turned to Marcus, who was still looking at the alien ship on his console. Keep trying to establish a dialogue. There has to be another way to communicate with them. I'm on it, Marcus replied. His eyes were glued to the screen as he attempted different signals and frequencies, trying to send another message to the ship. But each attempt was met with the same unyielding silence. The alien ship didn't respond in any way that they could comprehend. The hum from the ship grew louder, more insistent. It felt like the very air was vibrating with energy, charging the atmosphere with tension. It was as if the alien ship itself was preparing for something, waiting for a response from the Elysium. The sense of anticipation was unbearable. Then, without warning, the alien ship moved. It wasn't a sudden, violent action, but a slow, deliberate shift. The massive vessel rotated slightly, its enormous silhouette growing larger in the viewports. The lights on the ship flickered, and the hum grew to a deafening crescendo, vibrating the entire Elysium. What are they doing? Sarah asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. I don't know, Mason said, but whatever it is, we're going to find out. As if in response to their growing anxiety, a bright, blinding flash of light erupted from the alien ship. It was blinding, cutting through the darkness of space like a beam from another world. The crew shielded their eyes, the light overwhelming their senses. When it faded, everything seemed to still for a moment, like the calm before the storm. Then, the ship's hull groaned. A low rumble reverberated through the Elysium, and the lights flickered once more. Captain, we've lost communication, Marcus said, his voice frantic. We're completely cut off from the outside. We can't reach Earth. We can't reach anyone. Mason's heart skipped a beat. They were alone, trapped in the vast emptiness of space with an alien ship that seemed to have the power to do whatever it wanted. But just as fear began to grip the crew, the alien ship spoke again. But this time, it wasn't just a flash of light or a strange frequency. The sound came through the ship's speakers, an echoing, haunting voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. You have been chosen. Prove your strength, humanity. Show us that you are worthy of the stars. The voice was calm, but its message sent a shiver down everyone's spine. This wasn't a simple communication. It was a challenge. The aliens weren't just watching. They were demanding something of them. What would it take to prove humanity's strength? What did the alien ship want from them? Mason's mind raced. There was no way of knowing what this test would involve. The aliens had shown their power, and now they were waiting for the humans to act. But what was the right move? Sarah, Mason said, turning toward the navigator, get us in range of their ship. We need to see if there's any weakness we can exploit. Captain, I don't think we can outgun them, Sarah replied, her voice filled with doubt. We don't even know what they're capable of. We don't know if we're fighting or negotiating. Mason was silent for a moment. The tension was palpable. The entire crew was on edge, uncertain of what would happen next. "I'm not thinking of fighting," Mason said at last, his voice steady but filled with determination. "But we're going to find out what they really want, and if it means standing up to them, then we will." The crew's eyes met, each of them understanding the gravity of what was happening. They had been sent into space to explore, to make contact with unknown civilizations. But now, they were faced with something far beyond their understanding, and they had to be ready for whatever came next. As the Elysium moved closer to the alien ship, Mason couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to enter the next phase of the test. Whatever lay ahead, they would have to face it together, and humanity's true strength would soon be put to the ultimate trial. The Elysium drifted closer to the alien ship, its crew on edge, waiting for the next move. The ship's massive silhouette loomed in the darkness, its flashing lights dancing across the viewport like a beacon. The crew had been given a challenge, and now they were forced to face it. Captain Mason stood in front of the bridge, his eyes fixed on the alien vessel. The voice from the ship still echoed in his mind. "Prove your strength, humanity. Show us that you are worthy of the stars." But how? What kind of test was this? "Captain, we're approaching the alien ship's proximity," Sarah reported, her voice steady but clearly anxious. "Our sensors are still not fully functional. It's like they're blocking our readings." Mason's eyes narrowed. The alien ship was clearly aware of their presence. It wasn't just observing. They were being drawn in. "Prepare to stop at a safe distance," he said, his voice firm. "We're not getting any closer until we know what we're dealing with." The hum from the alien ship was still there, vibrating the ship's hull, but it seemed to be fading, as if the aliens were waiting for something. As Mason stared at the unreadable, colossal shape of the alien vessel, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something they weren't prepared for. Marcus, who had been quiet for some time, finally spoke up. "Captain, I've been analyzing the data. I've discovered something strange. The ship isn't just blocking our sensors. It's manipulating the energy around us. The signal, it's not just interference. It's a test." "What do you mean?" Mason asked, turning his attention to the young communications officer. "It's not a signal we can decode normally. It's a kind of puzzle," Marcus explained. "It's almost like a game. The aliens are putting us through a mental trial, not just a physical one. They're testing our problem-solving abilities, our creativity, our willingness to engage." Mason felt a twinge of frustration. A puzzle. That's what it all came down to. But if the aliens were so advanced, why would they test them like this? Why not just communicate outright? The answer came in the form of another pulse from the alien ship. This time, it was stronger, almost overwhelming. The ship's lights flickered, and the hum turned into a low, steady drone, like a giant engine turning over. "Brace for impact," Sarah shouted, but it was too late. A brilliant flash of light engulfed the Elysium, and for a split second, everything went dark. When the lights flickered back on, the ship was no longer in the same position. The Elysium had been moved, dragged through space by an unseen force. Mason's heart raced. They were still in one piece, but the ship was no longer in the same place. The alien ship had shifted their position, without even touching them. They had been moved hundreds of miles in an instant. "Report," Mason barked, gripping the edge of his seat as he regained his bearings. "Unknown," Sarah said. "We've been moved to a completely new sector. Our navigation systems are scrambled, and we're cut off from our original location." "Damn it," Mason muttered. He turned to Marcus, who was still typing rapidly on the console. "What do you have?" Marcus paused, his face tense with concentration. "The ship's it's analyzing us, Captain. It's testing us to see how we'll react. Our systems are being manipulated. This isn't just about brute force. It's about adaptability." Mason's mind raced. The aliens had not only tested their ship's strength, they were testing their ability to think on their feet. Every move they made would be watched. Every decision would be analyzed. They want to see how we adapt, Mason said slowly, realization dawning on him. It's a trial of our intelligence, our strategy. Suddenly, the lights dimmed again, and a deep, resonant voice filled the bridge. It was not the same voice they'd heard before. It was different, colder. Your trial has begun. You will be tested not by strength alone, but by your mind. Solve the puzzle or face the consequences. The voice cut off abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The crew exchanged looks, uncertainty heavy in the air. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted the ship's controls. What puzzle? How do we even begin to solve it? Mason stepped forward, his eyes steely. He wasn't about to let fear take over. The aliens were testing them, but they wouldn't break under pressure. We're not going to be intimidated, Mason said. We're going to think our way out of this. Marcus, work with Sarah. Let's see if we can get some kind of clue from their ship. Marcus nodded and began typing rapidly on his console. Sarah adjusted the ship's sensors, trying to pinpoint any anomaly that could give them a hint about the puzzle. Minutes ticked by intense silence, broken only by the occasional beeping of the consoles. The crew worked in tandem, their eyes darting back and forth between the alien ship's movements and their own systems. Then, just as they were starting to feel the weight of the silence, a strange image appeared on the main display. It was a grid, lines of light, a web of energy connecting different points. It was a simple pattern, yet there was something unnerving about it. Is that a map? Marcus asked, leaning in closer. The grid on the screen flickered, shifting as if it was reacting to their presence. The lights in the grid began to pulse rhythmically, each beat sending ripples through the ship's systems. It was a puzzle, all right, an elaborate one. Mason clenched his fists, his mind sharp. It's a map, but it's incomplete. They want us to figure out how to connect the dots. Sarah narrowed her eyes. The grid, it looks like a star system. The lights are the stars, but they're not in the right positions. We need to make sense of it, but the pattern doesn't add up. Mason exhaled slowly. They had to solve this puzzle. They had no choice. All right, Mason said, his voice resolute. This is the first test. Let's figure it out and show them that humanity's strength lies not just in our force, but in our minds. The clock on the wall of the Elysium Bridge ticked relentlessly. Time was running out, but the crew was no closer to solving the puzzle. The alien ship had given them a simple map, a star system grid, but it didn't make any sense. The lights on the grid pulsed like distant stars, but they were all misaligned. The pattern was incomplete, a mess of seemingly random points. Mason stood over Marcus's shoulder, his eyes fixed on the screen. The map had become an obsession. The ship's AI had given them no hints. There was no clue, no guide. They were completely on their own. Come on, Mason muttered, tapping his fingers on the console. There's got to be something we're missing. The crew was tense, their eyes glued to the flickering grid. Sarah adjusted the ship's sensors one more time, hoping for any breakthrough. Nothing. Marcus had been working furiously, but the answer continued to elude him. Captain, he said, his voice strained. I've tried every approach I can think of. The grid doesn't make sense. I keep coming up with different patterns, but none of them fit. Mason's mind raced. The challenge was not just about brute strength, not about weapons or firepower. It was about outsmarting an alien intelligence. They needed to show the aliens they could think on their feet, solve problems under pressure. Suddenly, a new thought flashed into Mason's mind. What if the solution isn't in the grid itself, but in how they're supposed to interact with it? Marcus, Mason said sharply, what if the map isn't just a map? What if it's a sequence? What if the dots are time-sensitive? What if they want us to activate the stars in order? Marcus paused, his face lighting up with a glimmer of realization. You're right. It's not just about connecting the dots. It's about the timing, the order of activation. But how do we figure out the order? Sarah asked, her voice filled with doubt. Mason glanced back at the grid. The lights were pulsing in a rhythmic pattern, but there was no obvious logic to the sequence. He took a deep breath, focusing. There had to be a clue. Think, Mason said slowly. What if each pulse corresponds to something? The lights, they seem to flicker in response to the ship's systems. What if we're meant to follow the frequency? As if on cue, the lights on the grid shifted. The pattern had changed slightly, and Mason noticed that the pulses were not random. They were happening at regular intervals. Each flicker of light seemed to be synchronized with the ship's energy systems. It was subtle, but it was there. Marcus, Mason shouted, we need to match the pulses to the ship's energy pattern. It's not just about connecting the stars. It's about syncing with their systems. Marcus's eyes widened. I think you're onto something, Captain. The map is responding to our movements, and the pulses are acting like a code. Let me try something. Marcus quickly adjusted the settings on his console, tapping rapidly at the keys. As he did, the grid on the main screen flickered and shifted. The stars aligned into a new configuration, one that looked almost identical to the first, but with subtle differences. Got it, Marcus exclaimed. We need to activate the stars in sync with the pulses. Mason stepped back, his heart racing. Okay, let's do it. Sarah, get ready to engage the sequence. Don't start until Marcus says. Sarah's fingers hovered over her console, waiting for the signal. Marcus nodded, his eyes locked onto the grid. We have to start with the first pulse, right here. He pointed to the first light on the screen, which was now pulsing in a steady rhythm. Now, we'll activate each point one by one, but we need to be precise. No mistakes. Mason's breath quickened as Sarah activated the first star in sync with Marcus's command. The moment the first light activated, the entire grid shifted. The stars began to glow brighter, and the map rearranged itself, pulling the lights into a tighter formation. The next pulse came. Marcus directed Sarah, and once again, the lights flickered, rearranged, and pulsed in time with their actions. But there was no time to relax. The puzzle was far from solved, and each correct activation pushed the crew closer to an unknown outcome. Would they succeed? Or would the alien ship judge them unworthy? We're almost there, Marcus said, his voice growing tense as the grid morphed. Only 2 more to go. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she activated the third point. The whole ship shook as the energy resonated with the grid. The sound of the alien ship's hum grew louder, more intense. The crew felt the pressure mount. This was the moment. If they failed now, there would be consequences. Just one more, Mason said, his voice tight with anticipation. He could feel the eyes of the entire crew on him. The alien ship was watching, waiting for their final move. The last pulse came. Sarah didn't hesitate. She pressed the final command. A brilliant flash of light erupted on the screen, blinding the crew. The Elysium lurched forward, as if propelled by an invisible force. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the voice came again, softer this time, almost approving. You have completed the trial, it said, echoing in their minds. Humanity has proven its worth. The test is not over, but you have earned the right to continue. Mason's heart pounded in his chest. They had done it. They had passed the first trial. But what would the next one be? And what would it cost them? The crew exchanged looks, exhausted but relieved. For now, they had succeeded. But they all knew the truth. The real test had only just begun. The Elysium hovered in silence after completing the first trial. The tension on the bridge was palpable. The crew had passed the test of intellect, but what awaited them next? What had they truly earned by solving the puzzle? Captain Mason stood still, his eyes narrowed as he stared at the massive alien ship still floating ominously in front of them. The pulsing lights from the ship had subsided, but there was a sense that something greater was coming. Captain, Sarah said, her voice low but steady. What's next? The ship's systems are still intact, but there's no sign of a new challenge. It feels like we're being washed. Mason glanced at the main screen, which had gone black after the final puzzle was solved. He couldn't shake the feeling that the aliens were still observing them, waiting for their next move. Whatever happened next would determine humanity's fate. "We've passed their first trial," Mason said slowly, his voice filled with determination. "But they won't stop there. They want to know if we can handle more than just intellect. This is about proving our strength, our true strength." Marcus, who had been working furiously on his console, spoke up. "I think Captain's right. I've been analyzing the ship's energy output. There's a spike coming from the alien ship. I think it's another trial. And this one feels different." "What kind of trial?" Mason asked, his gaze snapping to Marcus. "It's not a puzzle," Marcus replied, looking up with a grave expression. "It's more like a direct challenge, a physical one." Suddenly, the entire ship rocked, throwing the crew off balance. The lights flickered as the hum of the alien ship grew louder, almost deafening. The pressure was mounting, and the crew could feel it in the air. Something was coming. Something big. "Brace for impact," Mason shouted as the Elysium trembled under the force of the alien ship's unseen energy. Then, without warning, a massive burst of energy shot out from the alien ship, engulfing the Elysium. The lights flickered again, and the ship lurched violently. The crew could hear the groaning of the metal as the force threatened to tear the ship apart. "We're losing power," Sarah cried, trying to regain control of the ship's systems. "The shields aren't holding up against this." Mason grabbed the armrests of his chair, his face hardening. He could feel the pressure building inside his chest. The aliens were testing them again. But this time, it wasn't just a mind game. This was a trial of survival. "Do whatever you can to stabilize the shields," Mason barked. "Marcus, get us out of here. Full throttle. Get us out of this energy field." But as Marcus typed furiously at the controls, it was clear that the alien ship wasn't going to let them escape so easily. The energy field only grew stronger, tightening around them like an invisible grip. The Elysium groaned under the pressure, its systems screaming in protest. "We can't outrun it," Marcus said, his voice tense. "The ship's pulling us in, Captain. It's not just energy, it's a gravitational force." The crew's panic was mounting as the alien ship's power intensified. They were trapped. Mason's mind raced. They had to do something. Something bold. They had no weapons to fight back. They couldn't run. But maybe they could use their surroundings. There had to be a way to turn the tables. "Sarah," Mason said quickly, his eyes narrowing with sudden resolve. "Remember the alien ship's frequency. I think it's controlling the field. What if we mimic the frequency? What if we use the ship's energy against it?" Sarah looked at Mason, wide-eyed. "You want us to hack their system?" "Exactly," Mason said, determination setting in. "We're not going to fight their power directly. We're going to use their own system to turn it off. Marcus, get us into the frequency range. We'll use their own field to break free." Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "I'll do it. But if this goes wrong, we're toast." Mason gave him a hard look. "We don't have a choice." With the crew working together, Marcus was able to interface with the alien energy field. The alien ship's hum intensified, vibrating through the Elysium as they sensed their systems. The tension was unbearable. Every second felt like an eternity as they attempted to match the frequency of the alien ship's energy wave. Then, with a sudden jolt, the alien ship's energy field flickered. "We've got it," Marcus shouted. "We're matched." Sarah, her face pale but determined, pushed the controls forward. The ship's engines roared to life, and they began to pull away from the alien ship. The force holding them in place started to loosen, and with one final surge, the Elysium broke free from the alien ship's gravitational grip. For a moment, there was only the sound of heavy breathing and the hum of the ship's engines. The crew had survived. But they knew this was far from over. Mason looked at his crew, his face a mixture of relief and anticipation. They had passed the second trial, barely. But the aliens were not going to let up. This was just the beginning. "You've done it." The voice of the alien ship boomed through the bridge, as if it had been watching the entire time. "You have survived the first true test. Humanity has shown strength in overcoming this challenge. But the trials will only grow more difficult. You have proven your resilience. Now, you will prove your courage." Mason's heart thudded in his chest. The aliens were far from done with them. They had passed 2 tests, but the hardest challenges were still ahead. The voice of the alien ship fell silent, leaving the crew in a tense, uncertain quiet. Mason turned to face his crew once more, his resolve firm. "Prepare yourselves. This is far from over. We've made it this far, and we'll make it through the next challenge." The crew nodded. They were ready. Together, they would face whatever came next.